The topic of Lecture 4 is text types. The question of text types offers a severe challenge to linguistic typology, that's systemization and classification of language samples as communicative units. In descriptive linguistics, typology focused on minimal units such as phonemes, morphemes, etc. In transformational grammar, typology concentrated on a set of basic sentence patterns and the rules for building other patterns. Traditional grammar used categories like declarative, interrogative, imperative, and exclamatory, or process, action, judgment, and identification while differentiating sentences into different types. Functional grammar offers process, action, feature classification. The usual typologies of sentences can't offer a means of classifying text as occurrences in communicative interaction. Another approach is the construction of cross-cultural typologies for languages of similar constructions. However, all these typologies are devoted to virtual systems, being the abstract potential of languages. If sentence typologies are simple but sterile, text typologies are dauntingly vast and subjective. Attempts to apply or convert traditional linguistic methods failed to meet the special needs of a typology of texts. We might count the proportions of nouns or verbs, etc., or measure the length and complexity of sentences, but without really defining the type. We need to know how and why these traits evolve. The fact that advertising texts have an abundance of adjectives and news reports have lots of verbs may provide a statement of symptoms for deeper lying tendencies, but certainly does not explain the types themselves. Statistical linguistic analysis of this kind ignores the functions of text in communications and the pursuit of human goals. Presumably, these factors may be correlated with the linguistic proportions. A text typology must deal with the actual systems. The major difficulty in this new domain is that many actualized instances do not manifest or exact characteristics of an ideal type. The demands or expectations associated with a text type can be modified by the requirements of analysis in a discourse context. The landmark in the study of typology of text was a conference held in 1972 at the University of Bielefeld, Germany. It brought new issues to light. Linguists began to think that a typology of text should be correlated with the typologies of discourse actions and situations. Unless the appropriateness of a text type to its setting of occurrence is judged, the participants cannot even determine the means and extent of upholding the criteria of textuality. For example, the demands for cohesion and coherence are less strict in conversation than in written texts. Moreover, in poetic texts, cohesion can be sporadically reorganized along non-conventional principles. If these various types were presented in inappropriate settings, communication would be disturbed or damaged. It might be more productive to study text types from the standpoint of evolution and usage. Textual typology is indispensable from social and pragmatic factors as well as linguistic factors proper. Bogrand offers the following list of such factors: A differentiation of social settings and participant roles leads to a differentiation of situation types. It entails that the differentiation of situation types engenders reliance upon those textual types which are supposed to have greater relevance. The accumulation of knowledge about situations in text fosters expectations about what is acceptable and effective in a given context. People build their own strategies to feed those expectations and to control textual occurrences correspondingly. The priorities of control result in the relative dominances of surface features such as word-class proportions and syntactic complexity. These surface dominances gain the status of heuristic patterns against which new text can be matched. The patterns may exert influence back on the control strategies applied to situation management. In this view, text types cannot be defined independently of pragmatics. People use text types as fuzzy classifications to decide what sort of occurrences are probable among the totality of the possible. As such, the text type can be defined as strictly as considerations of efficient applicability allow. Two approaches to the typology of text are readily evident in linguistic literature. First, one could begin with the traditionally accepted text types such as narrative, descriptive, argumentative, literary, and other types of text and seek to define distinctive traits for each. Second, one could undertake to define a series of texts independently and then observe whether one obtains a workable typology. The issue may have to be resolved by compromise, and the development of a text theory, the applicability of text-to-text typology should be envisioned such that traditional types become definable. When speaking about the typology of text, first of all, it's necessary to define what the term type means in linguistics. Bogrand and Dressler define a text type as a distinctive configuration of relational dominances existing between or among elements of the surface structure, the textual world, stored knowledge patterns, and the situation of occurrence. The relevant dominances can apply to elements of any size according to the circumstances. Without stipulating exactly what a text must look like for a given typo, these dominances powerfully influence the preferences for selecting, arranging, and mapping options during the production and interpretation of the text. You can certainly obtain fuzzy classifications of text among which there will be the mutual overlap. Some textual traits will be domain-specific, that's peculiar to the situation, topic, and the knowledge being addressed. Some traditionally established text types could be defined along functional lines, that's according to the contributions of text to human interactions. The main types of text in this respect are descriptive, narrative, and argumentative texts. Scholars have been able to identify some dominances for these types of text, though without obtaining a strict categorization for every conceivable example. Thus, the major functional semantic types of text look like this. The first functional type of text is represented by descriptive texts that are utilized to recreate or visually present a person, thing, place, event, or action so that the reader may mentally picture that which is being described. Therefore, descriptive texts aim to create a mental image of the particulars of a story, experiment, situation, and other things. Let's consider the beginning of Dreiser's story, The Lost Phoebe, which, in my opinion, represents a classic example of descriptive texts. Let's read the text. They lived together in a part of the country which was not so prosperous as it had once been, about 3 miles from one of those towns that, instead of increasing in population, is steadily decreasing. The territory was not very thickly settled, perhaps a house every other mile or so, with large acres of corn and wheat land and fallow fields that at odd seasons had been sown to timothy and clover. Their particular house was part log and part frame, the log portion being the old original home of Henry's grandfather. The new portion, of now rain-beaten, time-worn slabs, through which the wind squeaked in the chinks at times, and with several overshadowing elms and the butternut tree made picturesque and reminiscently pathetic, but a little damp, was erected by Henry when he was 21 and just married. That was 48 years before. The furniture inside, like the house outside, was old and reminiscent of an earlier days. And the text unfolds in this way, the author describing further in details the interior of the house, the orchard with its old-aged trees, and so forth, thus depicting a verbal and at the same time the mental image of the setting against which the plot of the story develops. And the description is done so masterfully that, without it, it would have been impossible to create a psychological portrait and tragedy of old Henry, the main hero of the story. As some scholars claim, description is more than the massing of details. It is bringing something to life by carefully choosing and arranging words and phrases to produce the desired effect. Descriptive writing may be found in other types of text frequently, as it is one of the most widely recognized modes of writing. Linguists indicate that the most appropriate and effective technique for presenting description is a frequency of conceptual relations for attributes, states, instances, and specifications. The surface text should reflect a corresponding density of modifier dependencies. According to Bogrand, the most commonly applied global pattern of descriptive text is the frame, which in linguistic literature is defined as a coherent structure of concepts that are related in such a way that, without knowledge of all of them, one does not have a complete understanding of the target situation or whatever it might be. Another functional type of text is a narrative text. Narrative texts are utilized to arrange actions or events in a sequential order. A narrative is a story that is created in a constructive format as a work of speech, writing, song, film, etc. that describes a sequence of fictional or non-fictional events. The word derives from the Latin verb narrare, which means to recount. The word story may be used as a synonym of narrative. but it can also be used to refer to the sequence of events described in a narrative. A narrative told by a character can be incorporated within a larger narrative. There are two main types of narrators or narrative modes: first person and third person, limited or omniscient. Generally, a first-person narrator brings greater focus on the feelings, opinions, and descriptions of a particular character in a story and on how the character views the world as well as the views of other characters in the story. For instance, we can observe all these characters of a narrative text in Butterflies, a two-page story by Roger Dean Kaiser. I'll read only the beginning of it. There was a time in my life when beauty meant something special to me. I guess that would have been when I was 6 or 7 years old, just several weeks or maybe a month before the orphanage turned me into an old man. I would get up every morning at the orphanage, make my bed just like the little soldier that I had become, and then I would get into one of the two straight lines and march to the breakfast with the other 20 or 30 boys who also lived in my dormitory. After breakfast one Saturday morning, I returned to the dormitory and saw the house parent chasing the beautiful monarch butterflies who lived by the hundreds in the azalea bushes strewn around the orphanage. I carefully watched as he caught these beautiful creatures one after the other, and then took them from the net, and then stuck straight pins through their head and wings, pinning them onto a heavy cardboard sheet. How cruel it was to kill something of such beauty! I had walked many times out into the bushes by myself, just so the butterflies could land on my head, face, and hands, so I could look at them up close. When the telephone rang, the house parent laid the large cardboard paper down on the back 7th step and went inside to answer the phone. So the story continues like this, the narrator giving account of the events that happened that day in the orphanage and the feelings and the experience that he got on the same day. If the writer's intention is to get inside the world of a character, as it was in the above given example, then a first-person narration is a good choice, although a third-person limited narrator is an alternative that does not require from the writer to reveal all that a first-person character would know. By contrast, a third-person omniscient narrator gives a panoramic view of the world of the story, looking into many characters and into the broader background of a story. A third-person omniscient narrator can tell feelings of every character. For stories in which the context and the views of many characters are important, a third-person narrator is a better choice. For instance, Tracy's story, The Lost Phoebe, represents a third-person narrator with the omniscient storyteller recounting the events in a sequential order in the settings that are described so masterfully. Most linguists studying functional types of text indicate that in narrative texts there is a frequency of such conceptual relations as cause, reason, purpose, enablement, and time proximity. The surface structure of the text should reflect a corresponding density of subordinating dependencies and the use of past, present, and future tenses, as well as the forms of the perfect. thus creating continuum of narration. The most commonly applied global knowledge pattern in narrative text is the scheme, which is a mental construct of reality as culturally ordered and socially sanctioned. The third functional type of text is represented by argumentative texts. They are utilized to promote the acceptance or evaluation of certain beliefs or ideas as true versus false or positive versus negative. Generally, argumentation theory studies how humans should, can, or do reach conclusions through logical reasoning. Typical argumentative texts have a three-componential internal structure which comprises the following elements: a set of assumptions or premises, a method of reasoning or deduction, and a conclusion or point. An argument must have at least one premise and one conclusion. In argumentative texts, classical logic is often used as the method of reasoning so that the conclusion follows logically from the assumption or support. In order to substantiate this statement, we again refer to the text about the crisis of welfare of elderly population in Western Europe. The text has the following argumentative organization: making claim, counterclaim, evidence of counterclaim, and alternative ways of tackling the issues. I'll read the text. All Western countries face a crisis in coping with the demands made on welfare provision by their growing elderly populations. The problem of resource scarcity is a real one, but perhaps not all countries have adopted so rigorously as Britain the view that the care should be based on the family model. Scandinavia, for example, provides residential facilities for elderly people not wishing to remain at home or to live with their families, and these facilities are often available for use by local pensioners on a daily basis. Elderly people in the United States have developed communities of their own, supporting each other and running them by themselves as their answer to increasing dependencies. Some have argued against these age-dense solutions, likening them to ghettos, but research suggests a high degree of consumer satisfaction. These examples from other countries clearly demonstrate that there are alternative ways of tackling the issue of caring and dependency, and that the family model of care, with the high demands made on women and lack of choice and frequent loneliness for the dependents, is not the only solution. Accordingly, argumentative texts abound in conceptual relations such as reason, significance, volition, opposition, value, etc. They will also contain a density of evaluative expressions and qualifiers, such as words or phrases expressing the speaker's degree of force or certainty concerning the claim. Such words or phrases include possible, impossible, probably, certainly, presumably, as far as the evidence goes, necessarily, etc. For instance, the claim, "I'm definitely a British citizen," has a great degree of force than the claim, "I'm a British citizen, presumably." Argumentative texts often show cohesive devices for emphasis and insistence, such as recurrence, parallelism, paraphrase, and so on. The most commonly applied global knowledge pattern in this kind of text is the plan for inducing beliefs. There are also literary, scientific, didactic, and other types of texts. Literary texts contain various constellations of descriptions, narration, and argumentation, which therefore need some other distinguishing criteria. As Bokrand proposes, the most comprehensive definition for linguistic text, literary text, might be a text whose words stands in a principled relationship of alternativity to the accepted version of the real world. This alternativity is intended to motivate insights into the organization of the real world, not as something objectively given, but as something evolving from the cognition, interaction, and negotiation. Literary text worlds often contain discrepancies which sharpen our awareness of discrepancies in the socially accepted model of the real world. However, even literary trends such as realism, naturalism, or documentary art, where care is expanded to make the text world match the real world, consider the text world as still not real, but at most exemplary for an alternative outlook on reality. Poetic text would then be that subclass of literary text in which alternativity is expanded to reorganize strategies such as sound, syntax, concepts, relations, plans, and so on for mapping plans and content onto the surface text in such a way that the resulting insights should be correspondingly richer. Scholars categorize poetic text into three distinct types: the narrative poem, or poem that tells a story, the epic poem, or a long narrative poem on heroic subjects, and the lyric poem, in which a poet or speaker expresses some emotional states. Literary and poetic texts could be seen in opposition to text types that intend to increase and distribute knowledge about the currently accepted real world. Scientific texts serve this purpose in their attempt to explore, extend, and clarify society's knowledge store of a special domain of facts by presenting and examining evidence drawn from observation or documentation. Didactic texts do not reach beyond society's current knowledge store, but aim to distribute established knowledge to a non-specialized or learning audience of text receivers. This intention requires the presentation of more abundant and explicit background knowledge than is customary in scientific texts. In didactic texts, the textual world must be presented by a process of gradual integration because the text receiver is not assumed to have the suitable knowledge background that a scientific text would require. Therefore, the linkages of established facts are of problematic and eventually problem-solving nature. Even within this modest typology, we can see that all text types cannot be explicated along the same dimensions, whereas there might be dominances of concept and relation types for descriptive, narrative, and argumentative text. The concepts and relation types in other textual types are probably domain-specific. Moreover, description, narration, and argumentation will be found in various combinations in other textual types. And finally, if text types are dependent upon situational settings, the basic question is how people use cues to assign texts of various formats to a given textual type. Thus, the issue of text types is one of global processing controls both in text linguistics and text analysis. People are probably able to utilize text without identification their type, but efficiency suffers, and as a result, the mode of interaction of the writer and the reader, or the speaker or the listener, remains vague. That's all for this lecture. Thank you for attention.